Going to go through Tim's outline that he had on the back of the bulletin. I may not stick specifically with it, but we're going to go through pretty much this lesson that he had prepared for us. I'll ask a question or make a statement, whichever one you want to call it. Have you ever studied with anyone, or have you studied with enough people or had conversations about the truth, about God's Word, about salvation, and has got the feedback, well, you don't know how bad I've been. And there's no way that God is going to save me. There's no way that God can love me as much as you're talking about because of the life that I've lived. I have had that one time studying with a guy that had spent time in the penitentiary and had a life full of drugs and just terrible things in his life. And he would just get down to the point of crying, but he couldn't go any further. And things like that haunt a Christian. I know we're going through our elder selection and things like that, and we've got to understand that we are, and it was brought up this morning, we are to love everybody. We may have people that we can think of in our minds, say, I just don't like that person very much. But did Jesus Christ turn his back on people that were causing him the most misery? Never. And we are to love everyone. We know that God is first and everyone else is second. And where does that put us? We should be last. And in the world we live in today, that's not the case. We see mostly people that are tuned in and they have their own little central world in life, and everybody else, once I get my stuff taken care of, and we're talking about worldly things, I think Tim refers to them as stuff, things and stuff. Once we get that taken care of, then I'll take time for you. And we're going to be talking about a guy tonight. Here we're going to use Mark chapter 5, verses 1 through, we'll probably go 1 through 20, but especially 1 through 13. God had a terrible, terrible life. He was totally outcast. Nobody could be around him. They had tried to chain him, tried to shackle him, and they couldn't even keep him shackled. This was a bad man. And in our reading here, we'll find out what his name is and what his name means. But there's so many things that we can go through, and this is a lesson that probably has been taught many times to our young people in the back. It's a lesson that everyone that's been raised in the church has heard it from a little child. But we want to go through this lesson and look at the path that this man took. If you will, read along with me. We'll read the first 5 verses here in Mark chapter 5. It says, "They came to the other side of the sea, into the country of the Gerasenes. When he got out of the boat, immediately a man from the tombs with an unclean spirit met him, and he had his dwelling among the tombs, and no one was able to bind him any more, even with a chain, because he had often been bound with shackles and with chains, and the chains had been torn apart by him, and the shackles broken in pieces, and no one was strong enough to subdue him. Constantly, night and day, he was screaming among the tombs, and in the mountains, and gashing himself or bruising himself with stones. It's a pretty miserable life, isn't it? David, you and I were talking the other day about how miserable a life a tomcat leads. Now, this is a miserable life. This guy, has he got anything going for him? You know, we don't know anything about him before this. We do know a little bit about him after this, and that's where a big portion of our lesson comes in. But this guy was full of demons. Okay? In verse 9, Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" What is your name? Legion. You know, when you look up legion in the ancient Roman army, that was 3,000 to 6,000 men. And if you go on and use just another portion of that definition, it just means many, many, many. A lot. So we don't know how many demons that Legion had in him, but evidently he had a lot. He had a lot of things going on that made him a madman. And evidently he was a large madman. Evidently he was a very strong madman. So there are a lot of things here that we can glean from this. Let's look at verse 6. And it says, seeing Jesus from a distance, he ran up and bowed down before him. Well, I can tell you around the Sea of Galilee, it's pretty much a gentle slope down to the water's edge. There's not any big cliffs, any deep ravines or anything like that. But it is coming down to the lake. And if we look where these Gerasenes, and Matthew, again, refers to it as Gadarenes, it's basically a community of about 10 different villages. This one happens to be called Cursey. Ancient village of Cursey. And we see, we're going to look and compare Matthew, Mark, and Luke on their account of this, and we're going to see some differences. We're not going to see the exact same thing said here. Whenever this out of his mind man, full of demons, looks down, and from this village, we're talking about, it could be 200 or 300 yards. I don't know. It's more than 100 yards. It's got some distance to it. He recognizes Jesus Christ. Now, where is Jesus coming from? He's coming from Galilee, coming from Capernaum. Okay? As he's crossing the sea, do you remember what happens there? Violent storm. Jesus is in the boat. What's he doing? He's taking a nap. He's asleep. They wake him. Do you not care that we're about to perish? He calms the sea. He comes across. Does he come across all the way across this body of water, which is some distance? Does he come across for a brother Jew? This is an encampment or 10 villages of Gentile, non-Jews. He comes across for a Jew, for a Gentile, pardon me. Okay? And as this man that's full of demon is up on this hill, he recognizes Jesus walking towards him. What does he do? Runs to him. How does he know? God knows. Let's go ahead with our reading. Verse 7 it says, "And shouting with a loud voice said, 'What business do we have with each other? Jesus, Son of the Most High God, I implore you by God, do not torment me.'" He not only knows this is Jesus, he knows he's the Son of God. Now remember who this guy is. He's a man that they cannot even keep him in chains. And he runs to Jesus, recognizing him and declaring him the Son of God. Next sentence, he says, "I implore you by God, do not torment me." Verse 8, "For he had been saying to him, 'Come out of the man, you unclean spirit.' And he was asking him, 'What is your name?' And he said to him, 'My name is Legion, for we are many.'" We are many. How did this crazy man, full of demons, recognize the Son of God? Does the devil recognize God? Does Satan recognize the power of God? He most certainly does. This man is speaking for many. He says, "And he said to him, 'My name is Legion, for we are many.' And he began to implore him earnestly not to send them out of the country." What does it mean to implore? Beg. He begged him. We need to make a note here. Jesus has begged 3 times in this short period of time here. Okay? He is begged right here by the demons. The demons that possess this man. Now there was a large herd of swine feeding nearby on the mountain. Verse 11. What is a large herd of swine doing in Israel? Now we know these are Gentiles, and he's on, you might say, the Gentile, the east side of the Sea of Galilee there is mostly Gentile. And then we know you can get on the west side and you can find villages that are Gentile also. But they were there with pigs. And we're not talking about a few pigs, we're talking about thousands of pigs. Okay? There's a couple of questions that come to my mind when I think about this. Christ comes over to visit a Gentile. We've got, the scripture here says 2,000 pigs. And we know that if they were feral pigs, a feral pig is normally taller and normally his front legs are longer than his back legs. These pigs had been domesticated somewhat, I'm assuming, because they had keepers. They had pig herders. Now, I don't know how many of you have tried to herd pigs before, but it's not an easy deal. They can be trained. They're very smart animals, but here we go. We're looking at all of these pigs, and we know what's fixing to happen from the many times we've looked at this. We know that Jesus is going to cast these demons into these pigs. Now, the demons are talking to Jesus, "Please don't just send us to the abyss. Please don't just cast us away. Put us in these pigs." And Jesus complied. What did the pigs do? You know, all the years reading this, and I'll say this, until I had the opportunity to go over there and actually see it, I always envisioned this cliff. These pigs run off of this cliff and they just stack pigs on top of pigs on top of pigs on top of pigs. When you read this and really look at this scripture, it was a slope and those pigs got to running. Okay? Now, I've never heard the word stampede used with pigs. We hear, if you've watched any westerns, you know what a cattle stampede is. But evidently, this was a stampede of pigs. Okay? Another question I asked myself, how many people think a pig can swim? A pig can swim. A pig survived in the wild by living close to water and doing their business, not only drinking, but doing their business in water and traveling in water to survive, because they're pretty low on the food chain. Well, they're high on the food chain for predators. But that's the way they would keep predators from tracking them. Pigs can swim. Even pigs, the little short-legged pigs we show and feed today, they can swim. Well, why did the pigs run in the water? Did they think they were going to swim across? You know, we look and we know that it was God's intervention. Now, these demons, they did not want to be sent to the abyss. Let's go ahead and look. And it said, verse 11 says, "And there was a large herd of swine nearby on the mountain, and the demons implored him, saying, 'Send us into the swine so that we may enter them.' Jesus gave them permission. And coming out, the unclean spirits entered the swine, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the sea, about 2,000 of them, and they were drowned in the sea." Now, pigs can swim. Pigs can't fly that I know of, but pigs can swim. But these pigs drowned. And they drowned for a reason. It's because God willed it. Verse 14, "Their herdsmen ran away and reported it in the city and in the country. And the people came to see what it was that had happened. And they came to Jesus and observed the man who had been demon-possessed sitting down, clothed in his right mind, the very man who had the legion, and they became frightened. Those who had seen it described to them how it had happened, and to the demon-possessed man, and all about the swine. And they began to implore him." Here again, they began to beg him, "Leave their region." Now we can say, when they heard this, they heard it from the herders, the pig keepers. And there was more than one. Okay? There were several men, evidently. Could have been young boys. I don't know. When we see the sheep and goat herders, you'll see some men, but you'll see some boys also working. We know that they had to be afraid of Jesus. One thing, anyone that could do that. Okay? But you know what? They're also mad because they lost 2,000 pigs. That concerns many people today, the worldly things. They had an opportunity to sit and listen and visit with the Son of God and learn. And they were worried about their worldly possessions. They worried about their pigs. Verse 17 said, "And they began to implore him to leave their region. As he was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed was imploring him, begging him that he might accompany Jesus. And he did not let him. But he said to him, 'Go home to your people and report to them what great things the Lord has done for you, and how he had mercy on you. And he went away and began to proclaim the Decapolis, in the Decapolis, and that's the word that represents these 10 cities, 10 Gentile cities on the east side of the Sea of Galilee, what great things Jesus had done for him, and everyone was amazed. Now, what's different here than when Jesus healed the blind person? What did he tell the blind man? Go and don't tell. On the west side of the Sea of Galilee, that's one reason Christ took to the water. Jesus took to the water because he was attracting such a crowd, such a mob of people that was following him. Well, he goes over on the east side, performs a miracle. He has one guy here, this demon-possessed man that he healed. He's going to go take that message to the rest of these Gentile cities. He's going to spread that good news. There's these 3 areas. 3 times Christ was begged here. And you know, he would have made that man's day if he would have said, "Come with me." You know, he's that fisher of men. But he wanted him to stay there and spread that good news. I want to look briefly at Matthew chapter 8 in this same account. Matthew chapter 8. And we're looking at verse 28 in particular. It says, "When he came to the other side into the country of the Gerasenes, 2 men were demon-possessed, met him as they were coming out of the tombs." Now, we don't have time to read the rest of this, but we'll see that Matthew has less detail than Mark and Luke do. I can't tell you why Matthew's account has 2 men. I don't know if there were so many demons there, it seemed like 2 men. I don't know if it was because this man was so large. I do know that Matthew is used earlier here about if you have something against your brother, you take someone with you, 2 or more, go to your brother and talk to him. And I also know that in Deuteronomy chapter 19 and verse 15, it mentions that same thing where 2 witnesses will be believed a whole lot quicker than 1 witness. It could be that, if you notice Matthew there at the end, he does not even mention the demon-possessed man trying to go with Jesus. He left that out. It may be that in Mark and Luke that they're talking about, there may have been 2 there, but they're talking about the one that was maybe the worst, the largest man. Maybe we do not know, but this was the man that was pure in his heart and wanted to go with Christ. Be one of those questions that we might want to ask one day when we have an opportunity to ask some questions about this or that, things that we do not know now. But it was the multiple numbers was used several times just to confirm the validity of testimony. To me, there were 5 triumphs in these few verses here in Mark. Number one, the demons were banished. They were taken out of this man. The unclean animals were destroyed. The demon-possessed man is freed. The power of God is demonstrated. And the good news of the kingdom is proclaimed to the Gentiles. You know, we've got to ask ourselves, am I unclean? And that's where the thrust of this is. Am I unclean? We know that we all have sin in our life. And just like the guy I was telling you about, are my sins so bad that God's unable to help me? There's no hope for my salvation. And we know that's nonsense. And this is a great example of this guy going from someone, I believe it's in Luke, refers to him as being, he is naked. He has no clothes on. They're not strong enough to hold him. They can't chain him. Keeping people from going here to there, living in tombs, living among the dead. And that's stacking the deck pretty high if you're going to try to stack the deck. But he was still able to cleanse him and to save him. And we've got to realize that that message is here for us every day. Every day. If there's anyone here that has a need, we would invite you and encourage you to come as we stand and sing the song that's been number 23.